started. Chapter 9. In this chapter, we're going to discuss land use regulations and environmental issues. So we're going to distinguish the difference between private land use controls and government powers relating to the public land use controls. We're going to describe environmental issues and hazardous substances, especially those that are subject to federal legislation, landmark preservation, and historic properties. So let's start off with land use control. The ownership that a person possesses in a parcel of real estate are subject to public and private land use controls, including zoning ordinances, building codes, and deed restrictions. I'm sorry, I'm just going to mute everybody. If you guys got a question, you could unmute yourselves, but somebody's got a TV on there making noise in the background, so I'm gonna mute that. Don't want anybody to get disturbed or distracted by that. Sorry. Okay. You're not. I'll get set up here for our notes. Okay. So the ownership rights that a person possesses in a parcel of real estate, like I said, are subject to these public and private land use controls, including zoning ordinances, building codes, and deed restrictions that can regulate how a property owner can use their own property. I mean, you figure it's your property, you could do whatever the heck you want with it, right? Wrong. The government does have control over how you can use your property to some extent. And we're going to learn about that in this chapter. So here are some of the private land use controls, such as deed restrictions. Who can place restrictions in deeds? We've learned about this already. Only private parties. Okay. Restrictions can only be placed in deeds by private parties. All right. Those restrictions that are placed in deeds, we call them restrictive covenants. Covenant is a legal promise. Illegal restrictions in deeds in violation of the law are not enforceable. Deed restrictions run with the land once they're added to them. And restrictions can be added with time limitations or based on the happening of a certain event. And we would call those sunset clauses, where those deed restrictions would go away if they were contingent upon a certain time period or tied to a certain happening of an event. That's called a sunset clause. So government cannot place restrictions in deeds, only private parties can. And the restrictions put in deeds are called restrictive covenants. Okay. Now, who can enforce those deed restrictions? Well, the owners of the property, a remainder man, heirs, or devisees. The book only says neighbors or the original subdivider. Okay, well, the subdivider, the original subdivider would have been the owner at the time, most likely. So neighbors, I guess if they're aware of restrictions that are in a deed, they could, file complaints about it. Or if they were named a remainder man, then they could enforce them. So owners, remainder man, heirs, and devisees. You could write that down there. They could enforce restrictions placed in deeds as well. So the government powers that we're going to learn about, there's an acronym to remember them that somebody made up called PEAT. Well, PEAT stands for P for police power, E for eminent domain, T for taxation, and E for escheat. These are the governmental powers. Police power The government's power, let's start off with the police power. These are the powers passed on from the federal government to the states, counties, and local municipalities to make legislation for the general welfare of the public that could place restrictions on a property owner, such as policing, the cops. Can the cops just enter your property, break down your front door, and come in? Can they just open up your gate and start walking around your backyard?
No.
No, not without a warrant. Or what about if they're chasing a criminal who went through the front door and closed the door behind them? Can they follow them and break down the door?
No.
Sure, they can. It's they don't know if this criminal broke into your house and closed the front door and now is going to hold people hostage or not, or do them harm. So sure, they could pursue a criminal when they're in the pursuit of a criminal. There's certain exceptions to these to your privacy and your rights. The cops are chasing a criminal. They know that criminal created a criminal act. They're chasing this guy down, and he runs into your house. They don't have to stop at the door and be like, I guess the chase is over. We got to let the criminal go because he got home. He got inside. Or maybe he's in someone's house and he's holding them hostage, So, yeah, they're allowed to break down that door and go right in. However, I guess that would be jurisdictional. I guess each town can have their own rules on it. Just like if you guys ever watch Cops or Live PD on TV. Anybody ever watch those programs? Cops or Live PD?
Yeah.
You see sometimes, depending on the department, some cops are not allowed to enter into high-speed chases under certain circumstances, because it could end up in accidents and endangering the public. So they're required to break off the chases. Now, that's jurisdictional. Depends on what that local municipality's rules on it are. Some municipalities, it depends on the decisions that politicians basically make that pertaining to the rules of what police can do or cannot do. Can they chase a criminal? In some of these areas, criminals know the law. They know that if it gets into a high-speed chase, that the cops are going to have to break it off. They can't keep up with that chase if it's going to possibly endanger the public in certain locales. So they do it on purpose because they know they could get away with their crimes. But either way, police power, policing is a power vested into the government for the general welfare of the public. We also have environmental protection laws. Do environmental protection laws protect you, the public? One would hope. But have these laws ever been abused? Sure. I could sit down and show you videos of cases where the EPA, during the Obama administration, he gave the EPA wide sweeping authority that they previously did not have to regulate certain areas in the name of environmental protection. But there were a lot of negative things that came from that. We've seen farmers who ended up getting shot by the EPA. When does the EPA carry guns? Well, they did. We've seen farmers get a father, he got shot and killed. Because his cattle were grazing on land that the EPA says that they now have the authority to regulate. And this farmer's family had been farming that land and having their cattle graze there since before we became a country. But yet now, all of a sudden, the EPA is flexing their muscle and saying you can't do that. There's an endangered desert turtle that sometimes walk in this area, and we don't want to kill them with your cattle. So you can't graze on that land no more. And it became a standoff even. And it got to the point where somebody was a little bit trigger happy in the EPA and actually shot and killed the father. The kids jumped in to to try to protect, and that, you know, they got swarmed by people with automatic weapons, and they ended up getting thrown in jail. They didn't end up getting released until Trump became president, and then he gave them. Well, actually, no, he had nothing to do with it, though. It's just that's how long it took for it to go through the court system, and a judge said that the EPA stretched their authority there, and they gave an apology to the family for shooting and killing their father and released them from prison. Yeah, thanks a lot. But who would have think that from environmental protection laws? Yeah, because who is watching those who are supposed to be enforcing the laws, right? Who is watching the regulators? Um, Even though it sounds like it's a well-meaning thing, there's another. I'll give you another example. When they did these environmental protection laws, it gave them more authority to the EPA, more authority to regulate areas that previously could not regulate. So it gave them. It put together a lot of weird rules. One of these weird rules was if you have a puddle in your property exceeds a certain size, it's now considered a body of water that can be regulated by the EPA. So we're having farmers, that they always run farm equipment. They're driving up and down the driveway and the roadway. When it rains, sometimes you get a big puddle. If that puddle's over a certain size, it can now be regulated by the EPA, as well as everything that's constructed around it within a certain distance from it. And so EPA has stretched their authority on that. And they started fining people tens of thousands of dollars a day for trying to regulate what they could do on their own property, because it was in the vicinity of this puddle that they could regulate they called it a waterway regulated by the EPA. There's tons of cases like this that I could show you the videos for, that went to court even, and then the EPA was ordered not to bother these people no more, and not fine them, and actually had to pay their legal fees and pay them money for the harassment that they were doing. So it's something as innocent sounding as environmental protection laws. Who are the protectors? Who are the enforcers? Zoning and building ordinances can regulate the use, size, occupancy, construction, and rental of real estate. Rental. Did you guys know that if you own a property, you can't rent it out unless you get the government's permission? Were you aware of that?
What do you
No.
mean?
I did not know.
You need to first register your property as a rental property.
What is when we have unity more than three and more than
So like
3 plus?
a two-family
Unit
house?
Doesn't matter if it's a single family house.
Oh,
If you-
single family house also?
If you're going to offer rents, guys,
So if you have a two-family house,
it could be a one-family house. It
I'm
doesn't.
saying if you have a two-family house, you have to register it.
Yeah, before you could rent it out. It has to be registered with your local municipality as a rental property.
How do
And
you
then-
know if it's registered?
And then it needs to be inspected by the local ordinance inspector and the fire department to make sure it complies. There's no conditions that could cause the threat to the health or safety of the occupants. And then every time you change renters, you need to get it re-inspected and pay another application fee to get a new CO for the new tenants.
I have never heard of this.
So what if,
You'll be fined heavily if you do not do this.
Yeah, I've heard of it, but I didn't know that all towns are like into it. I know that certain towns are more into it than others. They said you like an application like annually, but I didn't know that it was like statewide kind of thing.
Yeah, well, the thing is, there's also a state regulation now that requires each municipality to make sure, because New Jersey didn't want to be outdone by any federal laws. New Jersey actually has a law pertaining to it's called the lead safe law. So they need to make sure that every property that's rented, you need to have it certified lead free. Any property built after before 1978 needs to be certified lead free. And it needs to get inspections every so often. We're going to go over that at some point in this chapter. But that's another inspection you got to pay for if you're the owner of the property. Damn, it's my property. I figured I could do whatever I want with it. Well, you can't. Can you build a shed in your backyard?
No, you have to get permission.
Well, once again, it depends on the municipality. If it's under a certain size, you may be able to just put up a shed. If it's over a certain size, it may require a foundation and to have certain tie-down construction to keep it mounted to a foundation. So in the events of storms and stuff, it doesn't blow away and all that. Some municipalities, it doesn't matter the size, you still need to get a permit. But then there's different requirements for sheds of different sizes. You know, it depends on the municipality. That's from municipality to municipality. But these are the building codes, the building ordinances that your local municipality has that you need to comply with. Now, eminent domain, these are powers to seize privately owned property for the greater good of the public. Oh, but you know what? Let's back it up for a second, because there's something else in my town that's been a big issue in my town. We get a lot of people now. They're buying these properties and then tearing them down and putting up these big houses in their places. And in the meantime, the house may just sit there, or maybe they rent out that house, and they have not been keeping up on cutting the grass. So our municipality recently passed an ordinance that if you allow your grass to grow taller than 6 inches in size, they could issue you a warning and then a fine of up to $5,000 for not cutting your grass. Why is that? Well, it's a public health issue, because that now attracts rodents and all kinds of other pests and such, plus it's unsightly. Municipality create these types of regulations.
I have a lot of good stories about houses that they've received a fine from the township because they haven't cut their grass in months.
Yeah.
Months,
yeah.
And yeah.
I remember when I was a teenager, I used to do work with my cousin. He owned a landscaping business, and sometimes the city of Rahway would they contracted with him to send him out to properties to cut grass and do trimming where the homeowners weren't, and then they would bill the homeowners for it, you know. But in some instances, we actually had to call the police and have the police come out and sit there while we're doing the weed whacking and cutting the grass, so we don't get bothered by the homeowner who may be fighting against this, you know, because they don't want to pay a bill that the city's going to impose on them because they didn't cut their grass or do whatever they're supposed to do. You know, I've done that stuff before too. You know, you get some of these people, they get violent, you know.
And a bunch of yard snakes when I also cut the grass when it's that high too, a bunch of them.
Yeah, you get these little trees that grow out, you know, in the middle of the lawn now. If you let it go, you're not cutting the grass. So it can get pretty bad. So, you know, the municipalities want to make sure that this stuff is getting trimmed. Okay, eminent domain, these are the powers of the government to seize privately owned property that's needed for the greater public good. I'm putting that in huge air quotes right there. But the owner must receive just compensation. They can't just take your property. They have to pay you just compensation for whatever the value of that property is. Now, who's going to determine what just compensation is and what is a greater public good could always be up for debate. So the process of taking the property through the court system is actually called condemnation. So the power of the government to take private property with just compensation is called eminent domain, but the actual taking of it through the court system is called condemnation. So the power is eminent domain, the actual taking through the courts is called condemnation. You need to know the difference for exams. Now, eminent domain powers are not just granted to the government, but also certain quasi-governmental authorities like public utilities, land clearance commissions, railroads, public housing and redevelopment authorities. They also have the powers of eminent domain. Let me ask you.
Yeah, I've heard of this.
Yeah. Can I, Victor Kaminsky, take your house from you using eminent domain?
No,
Why not?
you're not the government.
Okay, well, it's not just the power of the government, but certain land clearance commissions, redevelopment authorities, housing development, what do they call it here? Let me not ad lib here. So what do we see? Eminent domain powers are granted to governments, quasi-governmental authorities like public utilities, land clearance commissions, railroads, public housing, and redevelopment authorities. So, can I take your property by eminent domain? No, I'm not on that list. But I could still take your property by eminent domain. You know how? I make nice with somebody who does have the power of eminent domain, and I ask them to use their power to take your property, to justly compensate you for it, and then turn over that property to me, which I will then reimburse the city the money that they spent to justly compensate you for it. And now I could do with that property whatever the hell I want. Maybe I'm a developer or a builder or something. Because I explained to maybe the mayor of the town or somebody who has the power of eminent domain how it's in the municipality's best interest to exercise their powers to take your property and turn it over to me. Maybe I'm going to do a development that's going to generate a lot more tax revenue for the municipality, which then they could use it on the municipality for the greater public good, that money, and that's the kind of stretches that they take to take people's property from them. Doesn't seem fair to do it, but sometimes this is what's done. Eminent domain powers are being abused all the time. Right now, in my town, there is one of these high-rise housing complexes getting built right next to the train station. It used to be a Quick Check and a bunch of Carvel, sub shops, and all kinds of laundromats and all kinds of other stores and restaurants that were in that shopping center, in that strip mall. But the mayor knew this, and they wanted to take away the property to turn over to a developer so that they could build this high-rise and maybe get a lot more tax dollars. But you can't just take away a property that's thriving, that's being used and is profitable, and it's not negatively affecting the community. You can't just take away that property. It's not really needed for a greater public good to take away the ownership from one person, one investor, to give it to another investor builder, right? So what did the mayor do in my town? Well, I had his people that were in charge of this explain it to me, and they were not shy about it. They're so blatant in how they do this stuff. He said, well, we just had the police department slow their roll in responding to calls when, you had a problem with a homeless person or somebody there that, got mugged or robbed, or, somebody's getting harassed by somebody over there. Maybe there's drug addicts in the area. We just didn't have the cops respond to it. So then the problem became bigger and bigger, and it grew more and more. And so the property got what we call blighted. A blighted community is one where crime is rampant, homelessness, drug use. It's an eyesore, and it's negative. It's not a good place to be, right? So they actually kind of forced this to happen so that now that they could claim that the property is blighted, so that they could then use the power of eminent domain to take that property and turn it over to a developer who's going to turn it around and improve it and get rid of all that homelessness and drug use and crime that's over there. How effed up is that? Is that an abuse of power? I would say it is. But this is actually becoming very common right here in New Jersey, that this is going on. I see this guy. He's got a blog on Instagram or one of these social media pages where he talks about all kinds of New Jersey issues. And he was talking about eminent domain being abused. And he was like, has anybody else experienced this where their community is taking properties by eminent domain claiming that they're blighted? Say, pay close attention to that word blighted and see if they've been using that word blighted. Because they're probably stretching the law there a bit and violating people's rights in order to try to take their land from them, claiming that it's blighted. But it happens. So taxation is another form of government power. You know, it's a charge used to fund the operation of government. To have garbage pickup, to have waste disposal, to have the streets paved and snow removal and policing and fire and emergency services and all that good stuff is fun to have schooling, education, all that stuff is funded through taxation. Escheat is another government power. What is that? It's when someone dies intestate. What does that mean when they die intestate?
Somebody who passes
Was
away
that an
without a
will?
will.
Somebody who died without having a will. So if you die intestate and no heirs can be located, the property reverts to the state. This is another government power they have. They'll take the property of the deceased person who did not have a will, and heirs step forward to claim the estate. The state will take it. So these are the four police powers. These are the four governmental powers: police power, eminent domain, taxation, and escheat. So let's highlight it now. I wrote that acronym here at the beginning. They actually have it at the end after all the four governmental powers. I just wrote it here at the beginning. PEAT. Police power, eminent domain, taxation, and escheat. Okay.
Yep.
And then we have, I just put a box around this. These are the bodies that have the powers of eminent domain. And then we'll just highlight what taxation is and what escheat is with a little cross reference to chapter 20, where we actually learned about escheat previously, right? And how that works. Okay, everybody got that?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so once again, here's a slide that has all of those explanations on it if you want to snap a picture of this slide to study. Okay. And land use controls. Municipal governments authorized to implement a local master plan to manage the municipality. Every municipality has a master plan. Sounds very diabolical, doesn't it? A master plan. What is a master plan? Well, a master plan is a plan just like a business plan before you start a business. You got to have a plan on how you're going to manage that municipality. That covers everything from how you're going to deal with the policing for the safety, the education system, the general welfare of the public, the garbage removal, the sanitation, the providing of fresh water usage, and of this nature. These are uh, what happens in the event of natural disasters or war. How what we do in managing this community, this municipality. So every municipality has a master plan on how the government is going to run uh, this municipality here. Okay, that's hmm, that's what the master plan does. Uh, Now, zoning ordinances, these are laws of the government authorities, the municipalities and counties that regulate and control designated districts, which they refer to as zones. The use of the land, they cover the use of the land, what it can be used for, as well as the structures, what can be built where and what purpose they can be used for. We have many different zones in municipalities. Here's 7 of the common ones. We have residential, commercial, mixed use, industrial, institutional, recreational, governmental use. Is that more than 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7 of the most common ones. But then we also have subclasses of zoning. You don't just have residential zoning. We've got R1, R2, R3. There's different classifications of zoning too. For single family homes, multifamily, where we could put apartment buildings, there's mixed use zones and such. Here, I'll show you an example by clicking on my city where I live in Linden. Let's click on the zoning map of Linden. Take a look at this. This is zoomed out. There's a legend here on the right side of the screen now, and if I were to zoom in on that, you know what? I'm better off just opening this from my computer instead of from here. So let me minimize the slideshow for a moment so I could get that map from my computer and show it to you rather than the through the browser, which could be a pain in the butt. So let me see. got a lot of stuff open on my screen. I gotta move things around so I could find it. Yeah, let me see the zoning. Let me just do a search. There we go, Linden zoning map. Let's open up that folder. All right, I have a couple zoning maps here to show. Let me just move them to the real estate folder here. And then I'll open it up from. Copy. And I can open it. And let's see, I can share it with you guys once it opens up. And it's not the same one. That ain't it either. Hold on a second. I got the wrong one. Um, zoning. Okay. Let me search my computer again. Safety zones, no, that's something else. Hmm. All right, let me try search by. Okay, there we go. I found it. Zoning code book, not the code book, the zoning maps. Well, I may have this in the shared, I may have this in the slideshow instead of looking around for it. Let me check the next coming slides. I may have it there. All right, I guess we'll just open it up directly from the slideshow, and I'll download it from there. Let's see. Is camera working again? There we go. Going to download it to my computer right from there. Instead of opening it through the browser, I'll download it. And then we could put that on the desktop. Screenshots. So once again, I got to minimize that. Sorry again. Conversion screenshots. Download it. Desktop. Conversion screenshots. Zoning. Good. On the file. Okay, there, very good. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. So this is the zoning map of the city of Linden. Okay, you can see the whole city outline here. And you have a legend here on the right-hand side because it's color coded. If we were to zoom in on that legend here, you can see the different zoning. C is for commercial. We got central business districts, commercial districts, general commercial, C1B, C1A, C2, EDD, economic development, heavy industrial, light industrial, with planned residential options. You know, they've got a lot of different things. We go down to residential, we got R1A, R2A, R2B, R3, R1B. These are different zoning where we have single family with the 50-foot of frontage. That's zoned R1A. Two family with 50-foot of frontage. That's R2A. Or R2B is two family with 40-foot of frontage. You also have an R1B with single family with 40-foot of frontage. It depends on where it is in the municipality. We've got apartment buildings, theater development district, runway protection zones, because this my town has an airport. We have what we call airport flight path safety zones. And you can see that right over here. That's where the airport is located. So any homes that may be within this airport flight path safety zone, they may be limited on how high they could build their structures, because that's the area where planes come down at a glide path to land or take off. And these are the areas where they're also more likely to crash, as well as off to the sides of the runways. So that's where the airport flight path safety zones are. This is one zone at the end of the runway here, and here's the other side of that runway, because this is all the airport here. Let's see. I live in this area over here, so that's R1A. R1A was what? Single family requiring 50-foot of frontage in order to have a one-family house. So different areas are zoned different ways. R2B, that was, what is R2B? Let's take a look. R2B is two family with 40 foot of frontage. Okay, so you got these different zones all over the place in town where different kinds of structures can be built, and that's how your town regulates it. Okay, just to give you guys a little bit of insight on how these maps work and how the government regulates this stuff. Go back to the slideshow. So you guys have this highlighted. Zoning ordinances are laws of the local governments, such as municipalities and counties, regulating and controlling the use of the land and structures within designated districts or zones. And that's how they go about doing it. They have the zoning that dictates what can be built where and what its purpose and use can be. They can't regulate who lives where, maybe by their income levels or things of that nature. They can only regulate what kinds of structures can be built where and what its purpose can be. Then we have zoning ordinance. Zoning ordinances were first introduced in New Jersey in 1967, to give you a little history. Not an exam. Don't need to worry about that. They dictate what kind of structure can be built and where, and the purpose it can be used for. So the first zoning ordinance ever created in New Jersey was in 1967, and that was in Trenton. That doesn't mean that automatically that was throughout the state. That was only in that one municipality. Each municipality started creating their own zoning ordinances over time after that. So you could have different zoning laws in one town versus the next town. They get to manage the land in their municipality. You follow? That's what zoning ordinances do. And because of that, who's regulating the regulators that are creating these rules and then enforcing them? Well, sometimes those laws can be abused. You guys recall exclusionary zoning and what that is? It's a discriminatory zoning practice that was outlawed by the Mount Laurel court decisions. It was a zoning power abuse requiring larger lot sizes anywhere in the municipality, effectively pricing out poor people from the neighborhoods who cannot afford to buy a larger lot in order to build a house on it, because they required larger lots to build homes on. Instead of having different lot size requirements in different areas to provide a range of housing to not price people out of the entire town. So they didn't have a range throughout that municipality. Okay, so we're talking about non-conforming use. That's a property that doesn't meet the current zoning requirements. But it then again doesn't have to. Because it's been there since before the zoning law was created in your municipality. So therefore it's grandfathered for the use that you're currently using it for. Because you've been using it for that purpose before the zoning laws were created or changed. So that's what the term grandfathered means. Your use is old, like grandpa. So we're going to have them stick around. So we're going to allow you to continue using it for that purpose. Just because they changed the zoning laws doesn't mean that they could require you to change what you're using your property for. You follow? You guys ever wonder how they put that little candy store in the middle of a residential neighborhood? Not that convenience store, it's commercial property. It's commercial use. How'd they put that up in the middle of a residential neighborhood? You guys ever wonder? Because they were there using it for that purpose before the zoning laws were created in your town, changed for that area maybe. So they're grandfathered to continue using it for that purpose, as long as they don't change its use, because once you change the use, you lose the grandfathered status and you can't go back. So that's called a non-conforming use. Now, what if you want to use a property for a purpose that doesn't meet the current zoning requirements? You have a new proposed use that does not meet the current zoning requirements. Well, you can apply for a permit to vary from the current zoning laws. They call that a variance. Okay? So a variance is a permit for a new use, a proposed use that does not meet the current zoning requirements. Why would the municipality allow you to create a new use that doesn't meet the current zoning laws? Well, maybe you're experiencing a hardship because of the creation of the zoning laws or ordinances. We'll get into the hardships in the coming slides, but whatever the purpose is, or maybe it's for construction, you want to build something on your property, doesn't meet the current zoning requirements, because the zoning requirements may require a certain setback from the property line for any structure, or height restrictions, or use restrictions, and you want to vary from those zoning laws, you have to file for a variance. Now, who do you file for that permit, that variance with? Don't just say the city. Who in the city do you file it with? Well, you file it with the Zoning Board of Appeals. The Zoning Board of Appeals in every municipality is there to listen to and grant or deny variance permits based on hardship and need by those that may be impacted by the creation of zoning laws or regulations or the changing of them. Does this all make sense? Am I explaining it in a clear, concise way? You guys are grasping this?
Yeah.
Okay. See, nothing rocket sciencey here, right? It's all easy, fairly easy to understand stuff. It's just a lot of stuff we're learning. That's it. So subdivision regulations cover the following and then some. A subdivision is first of all, what is a subdivision? A subdivision is when you have a piece of land and you divide it into more than one lot. And when you sell off a small lot off of the larger lot, it is now classified as a subdivision. So subdivision regulations are in place to cover things such as the location and the grading, the alignment, surfacing, and the widths of the streets, highways, and other rights of way. Installation of sewers and water mains. They regulate the minimum and maximum lot sizes and density area ratios, meaning how many homes can be built within a close proximity of each other, or for your particular lot, how much of that lot space you could build over. They regulate building and setback lines. So let's highlight exclusionary zoning and non-conforming use. We're going to highlight the things we went over in the last couple of slides. You guys want to?
Could you the last slide?
Yeah, what's up?
Could you go back to the last slide with the subdivision regulations?
This one?
Yeah, thank you.
We'll have a later chapter 18 is all about subdivisions. So we'll get really deep into it in chapter 18.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So let's do these highlights now, which went over those things on the previous slide. Let me know when everybody got that so I can change the slide.
Can I ask a question?
Of course you can.
I was in an area like nearby my town, and I noticed that there were sign like it was on a regular like street or something, and it was like there was a sign up like saying like, please do not park here if you don't live on this block, signed off by, the HOA members. So I asked someone who lives in the area, I'm like, what's up with that block? Like it didn't look like so she said, oh, in order for them to be able to build, so many houses in that area, they had to like name it like, put it under an HOA kind of idea. What does that mean?
Well, an HOA is a homeowners association.
Right, but what did that do? Like,
have a-
is it different zoning properties over there?
It had to be that has to be a condominium complex over there.
Oh,
But you don't need to have a condominium complex to have regulation. Condominiums can create rules, those bylaws, yeah, and covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CCNR,
Right.
that regulates what kind of vehicles can be parked where, and if you could have oversized vehicles or commercial vehicles, or the resident-only parking versus guest parking areas. Okay, you could have that within subdivisions. If it's not a subdivision, the municipality can impose certain regulations on what kind of parking can be where. Like you could go down to your town and apply to have a handicap parking space made in front of your house because there's tight parking on the street and there's hard to find parking, and maybe you're handicapped or you have a relative that's handicapped that lives there with you, and you want them to put a handicap spot in front of your house so you could park, the handicapped person can park there, and not have to try to find a place blocks away, you know. And you can get a permit for that, and they'll come out and then they'll put up a sign over there for handicap parking only. Or they could even assign that spot. I don't know if they could assign that spot to somebody actually with a specific handicap permit. I think that would be open to everybody with the handicap permit, period. Let me see what else.
But the fact that it was like condominiums, that changed the zoning.
Well, condominiums can regulate, that's private property. They can regulate what's going on in their property.
Like, let's say that block wasn't zoned for, it was zoned to only have 6 homes. They wanted to put 12 homes on there. So they zoned it for condominiums, and then they made it like a, HOA.
The condominiums are not, you don't just take a city block and turn it into condominiums. You need to own all the property and then turn it into a condominium, you know?
Right, the developer did that.
Yeah. So that would have had to have happened. But look, let me go over another scenario. Give me another second here. You could have city streets that, the residents always complaining, hey, there's a business down the block, and it always gets so busy. People go to that business. Maybe it's a club or a bar or something, right? And they get so busy that they park all down the block, and there's no parking for the residents. So they make that street permit parking only for residents only. And so you have to have a sticker on your vehicle that you're a resident of that area, and that you could park there, and you're not going to get towed or fined, but everybody else will be. And that's not part of a condominium. It doesn't have to be a condominium. They could do that in the town too. I know Woodbridge does that all over the place. It depends on the rules that they choose to make up down at the city hall. Who's making them rules? Your city council and your mayor. Based on public input, maybe, or requests. All right, here's a pretty good definition for exclusionary zoning. Sometimes used in the past to keep low income and moderate income families out of suburban communities, has been outlawed by the New Jersey Supreme Court Mount Laurel decisions. Non-conforming use is a use that does not a building that does not conform to the zoning use because it was erected before the enactment of the zoning law. So this is called a non-conforming use, and it's permitted to continue. It's grandfathered. That's what being grandfathered means. The use is old, like grandpa. It's allowed to continue, as long as you don't discontinue that use or change its use. However, courts have ruled that simple non-use does not constitute abandonment. So simple non-use doesn't necessarily mean that you have abandoned that usage. The zoning board of appeals are established in every community to hear complaints about the effects of zoning ordinance that were created on specific parcels of property. You could petitions may be presented to the Board of Adjustments for exceptions to the zoning law. Determinations can be challenged in state courts if you don't like what your local municipality has to say about it. And those variances are permits. So I just wrote the word permit here after variance. A variance permit from existing regulations to allow the use that does not meet the current zoning requirements. So if you want to use a property for a use that does not meet the current zoning requirements, you could apply for that permit. And they start giving you some examples here, which I'm going to use with illustrations on the next coming slides. So we're not going to read it all right here just yet. Everybody got this highlighted with the word permit written in?
Yep, I did.
Okay.
Got it.
So here we have the explanation of a variance, what a variance is, and who do you apply to get a variance. In this example that we see on this slide, your municipality has a zoning requirement that requires a 30-foot setback from the front property line, from the frontage. So where a structure can be built. So this house is set back 30 feet. However, the neighboring house, the neighboring property, this would create a hardship for them because 30 foot back, there's a cliff or a mountain. So that wouldn't allow them to build a house. So they could file for a variance from the current zoning law that would allow them to build closer to the street or to the property line, the frontage, than normally allowed because of that hardship. That's a perfect example of where a variance use can be used. Right, let me grab a screenshot of this. Put that in the notes. In this example, are you guys familiar with Colonia Estates? Anybody familiar with Colonia section? It's near the Colonia Estates is between Island and Edison. There's a section between 27 where you have the train tracks on one side and a golf course on the other. And you're driving down Route 27 towards the Edison Island area. There's a bridge that goes over the train tracks, and it actually looks like a little side road for like golf carts or utility vehicles or whatever, but it's actually a little access road that if you turn underneath that bridge, you could actually get onto this long winding road. And this long winding road takes you to an area where you have these $1 million homes called the Colonia Estate section. You wouldn't know they're back there unless you wandered off back there or lived there. And so it's a winding with houses, these beautiful stately houses on both sides of the street. But just before you get out of it and you enter into Edison on towards New Dover Road, when you take this long winding road, it starts to elevate. And so one side of the street cannot see the other. So just before you get out of the Colonial Estates section, there's this one mansion over there. And then across the street, there's a section of average priced homes, you know, your normal homes, your small homes, average priced homes. There's a little neighborhood like that there. And I had a girl in one of my classes a couple of years back. And I've been using this as an example in class, where she had a house, her father's house, and the garage was kind of listing to the side. It was old, looked like it was about to collapse. So he tore it down. He tore down the garage with the intent of rebuilding it, but he didn't want nobody to get hurt, so he tore it down because it looked like it was going to fall over any day, you know. And then the next year, he saved up enough money to do the construction. He's going to rebuild the garage. He went down to the city to file for the permit to build a garage, and they said you can't build a garage there. And he goes, "Why?" They said your property is not big enough to meet the zoning requirements to build a garage, to have a garage. And he said, "But I always had a garage there." He said, I just tore it down last year." And they looked up their records and they said, "Well, we didn't see that you filed for any permits for demolition." Yeah, you need a permit for demolition too. So thank goodness they didn't fine him for not getting a demo permit. But they said, "Okay, so you tore down the property, you tore down the garage, you got to meet the current zoning requirements. And the zoning requirements say your lot is too small, you can't build a new garage. So you completely tore it down?" And he's like, "Well, the foundation's still there." And they're like, "Oh, so you didn't completely tear it down. There's still a foundation." Well, you can rebuild the garage based on that foundation. We'll give you a variance to do this. However, when we issue you a variance, because your construction does not meet the current zoning requirements, you're going to have to send out a letter to everybody that lives within 300 feet of your property, letting them know that the city approved the variance for you to do this construction. And if anybody asks questions or says no, well, then you're going to have to address those issues then. You can't build unless we get past that point. So he did that. He sent out a letter to everybody within 300 feet. That guy across the street who couldn't even see his house, he said, "No, I don't want him building it there." Now, so this guy was not able to build his garage. However, he's able to take this property owner to court and ask him to justify why he says no, and see if it's a justifiable reason to hold them up and prevent them from building that garage. And the last I heard, her father wasn't able to take off work to take the time to do that, so they didn't build the garage yet. I don't know if they ever did because she was no longer in class anymore, so I don't have a follow-up on that story there. But last where they left it off, he wasn't able to build the garage because they didn't get to challenge the person who said no. But that's how permits work. Okay, that's how this works. So even if the city granted a variance to them that would allow them to build that garage there, you may not be able to get the permission to do it if the neighbors say no. Kind of sucks, right? But that's the rule. That's the way that it works. I'll put that example in the notes as well. All right, a setback is more than these things that hold us back in life from reaching our goals. In this instance, a setback is the minimum distance from a property line that any structure can be built. We have front setbacks, we have side and rear setbacks of properties. And frontage is the width of the front of the lot. Of course, unless we're near a property that's near water. And then the frontage is waterfront. It's on the water side. Okay, so anytime there's a measurement also, like a 50 by 100 in the description, we know that this property is a rectangular shape. The first number is always the width of the front of the lot. And if it just says 50 by 100, we know it's a perfect rectangle. Front and back of the lot are 50 feet wide and the sides are 100. If there were four measurements, well, then we would see that it's not just a perfect rectangle, it could be a different shape. Okay. Oh. Oh boy. Just adjusting the notes to include this. Perfect. Density zoning is zoning for the maximum amount of homes that can be built per acre. Or if we're talking about a particular lot, how much of the total area of your lot can you build on or pave over? This becomes a concern. I just made up an example here. The density zoning ratio could be different than this. I just made up an example, 30 to 35% of a lot can be paved over or built on. Because your municipality is going to have some sort of a density zoning ratio that could show you how much of your lot you could cover with structures and paving and such, because you can't pave over your entire lot, because if you did, where's all the runoff going to go from the rainwater when it rains? Onto the neighbor's property, and the neighbor's going to have a flooding issue. Or the sewers start backing up. If everybody starts doing this, where's the water going to go? Normally it would just go to the ground and sink in, the ground would absorb it. But if everybody's paving over and building over their lot to the maximum density over it, you're going to have problems with more flooding. We're seeing right now a lot of flooding issues in New Jersey. You know, of course, we get the people that are always talking about it's climate change, it's climate change. That's nonsense. You know, it's not climate change. We're seeing more intense storms and more frequent storms. No, we're not. Look at the historic records. There's no evidence that proves that. Not at all. However, there is plenty of evidence that we've been constructing a lot more. We've been building a lot. And we've been covering a lot of land, diverting where the water goes, or the inability of the ground to absorb it. So the water's got to go somewhere, and that ends up flooding. Okay? So this is an issue that we deal with. From overdevelopment is a major issue, especially in New Jersey right now, with all the construction that's going on. It's actually causing a lot of this flood. Granted, the last storm that we most recently had, it wasn't that much rainfall, but it was an amount of rainfall that came down very quickly, which did cause the flooding because it came down so quick. So you got to look at the various factors for different things. You can't just say, oh, it's development, oh, it's climate change, oh, it's, you know, you got to look at the different factors, different storms, different situations, you know. But anyway, density zoning, we need to know. What is density zoning? It can be described as the maximum amount of homes that could be built per acre in a large development. But a single lot, it could be a limitation on how much of the total land can be paved over or built on. The purpose is to maintain an area of land that could absorb drainage from rainwater in preventing flooding in neighboring properties or overburdening of the sewer systems from the excess runoff. You know, that's a pretty good reasoning. So that's what density zoning is. We'll have that term again in chapter 18, density zoning. Construction regulations, the building codes, the UCC, that's the Uniform Construction Code. That's the state's minimum standard for construction. And the DCA in Trenton, the Department of Community Affairs, maintains the code regulations, code books on that. And their inspectors are the ones that enforce the building codes. Now, every municipality, almost every municipality, has their own code enforcement officials. Unless they may be a small municipality and they can't afford it. So sometimes municipalities will share services amongst neighboring municipalities. They could have the same code enforcement official that works both parts, you know, for example. But let's just say that they don't do that for whatever reason. Who's going to do the inspections? Anytime you use any construction or improvements, who's going to do the inspections of that work? It would be a state inspector from the DCA. They'll send down their own inspectors to inspect that work. And those guys, they eat, breathe, sleep that code. They could find things wrong with new construction. I'm telling you. I got a buddy that works for the DCA as an inspector, and he's like got a major stick up his butt all the time about everything. I play pool in a bar league, in a bar billiards league, and my friend who's a inspector for the DCA, he's on my or he used to be on my pool team, and I remember every time we used to go to bars. We go to a different bar because it's traveling league. You go to different bars and play different locations. And I remember one time we were in Elizabeth and we're going into a bar and he's hovering around by the front door. And I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, that's not right. I was like, what's not right? And he's like, well, the space here. And then he pulls out a tape measure from his belt and he's like, the space between the threshold and the entrance can't exceed 3/4 of an inch. And, you know, like he's like, I was like, dude, give it a rest. You're off the clock. Come in and have a shot and a beer. Relax, bro. Relax. You're not on the clock no more. You know, it's like these guys are eat, breathe, drink, sleep the code. You know, they're always thinking. The guy's walking in for pool league into a bar, and he's like, well, that's not right. And he's already analyzing, inspecting the building. You know, that's how these guys are. I'm telling you, they always find things wrong. So, the DCA, the Department of Community Affairs, they also are the ones that license all inspectors in the state. So every inspector, whether it's a private home inspector, or if it's a local municipal inspector or state inspectors, they're all licensed through the DCA, the Department of Community Affairs. And I have a link here where you can actually search the database of all the license and search the status of anybody that requires licensure through the state, through the DCA anyway. So you could verify a home inspector to see if they're actively licensed, or if their license expired, or if they let it lapse, or what have you. So look, I'll click on it and I'll show you how this works. So this is the website for the Department of the Division of Community Affairs. And we could click here for license type. And let's go down to, let's look for home inspector. There we go, home inspector. And I'm just going to do a search. We'll search the whole state. This is a long list of home inspectors, and look at this, more than 40 pages of home inspectors. But then again, some of these people could be dead for all we know. But we got some that are expired, inactive, active, pending. Some of them are in New Jersey, some of them are in New York or Pennsylvania, but they're licensed to do inspections in New Jersey. Okay. So you can see the people's names, each inspector's name, their license number, and the status of their license, and what city that they were licensed out of. I think that's where they live. It could be where they live, or it could be where their business is located. I'm not sure. But you could search the person's license number to see if they're actively licensed, and you should before you hire any home inspector, because only a licensed home inspector can submit a report for a buyer to inspect their property, and then you could suggest that the seller have to do certain repairs, or ask them to give you credit to do work based on this licensed New Jersey home inspector's report. Okay, so let's get you back to the slideshow here. And this was dealing with building and construction regulations. So those zoning laws were first introduced in Trenton in 1967, like I said before. And these zoning and building codes, they vary from municipality to municipality, the zoning. The building codes, well, they're generally the same throughout the state. There's a minimum that the standard that the state has to work off of, but municipalities can create their own zoning regulations and building requirements as well on top of that. Oh, I could share these links with you if you guys want. Let me put them in the notes. Oh, there we go. There we go. All right, let's do these highlights. I'm going to pause this recording for a moment. The building codes are maintained and enforced by the DCA, the Department of Community Affairs. And they perform inspections if the local municipality doesn't have a code enforcement inspector. So here is the link where you can verify with the DCA the inspector's license and their status. Anytime there's new construction done, you got to get a building permit. But then before anybody can occupy the premises, it needs to be inspected to make sure that everything is up to code. So for initial construction, you have to get what's called a CO, a certificate of occupancy inspection. Some people call it a CO, some call it a CFO, certificate of occupancy. If it's an existing structure that had some work done to it, it may, some municipalities call that inspection a COC, a certificate of compliance, showing that any work that had been done is up to code as well. Whereas others may just call it just a CO as well. They don't have a different name for it. Or maybe where there was no work done, and there's just a change of ownership taking place, there could be a CCO. That's a continued certificate of occupancy inspection that gets done. Either way, anytime a property is sold in New Jersey, it needs to get some sort of a inspection done. some sort of a certificate of occupancy or a variant of a certificate of occupancy done. So a CO or C of O, certificate of occupancy, to inspect new construction. A COC is a certificate of compliance. This inspection is required to ensure any construction is up to code for work done on existing structures. And a CCO is a continued certificate of occupancy. Sometimes municipalities require when none has been done, but every time there's a transfer of ownership, okay? But really, this is just a naming convention. Some municipalities have the different names for the different types of whether it was new construction or an existing structure, or if there's just a simple transfer and no work had been done. Whereas some municipalities, they don't use different names. They just call all three of those inspections a CO. Okay, it really depends on the municipality what they call it. All right, so don't get all bent out of shape if they call it something else. Just be like, all right, whatever. You know, yeah, I need that inspection. Okay, so a CO for new construction, COC, certificate of compliance for existing structures that had work, or a CCO, continued certificate of occupancy for buildings that didn't have any work done, but there's a simple transfer of ownership. We need to be aware of this because we need to notify the owner that they need to obtain the CO inspection from the municipality anytime there's a transfer of ownership. Which that reminds me, I'm doing a transaction right now, and I need to get my client to do this, to apply for the CO. The CO and fire inspection. Anytime there's transfer of ownership. All right. So the purpose of these inspections is to make sure that there's no condition that would cause a threat to the health or safety of anybody in these structures. So before anybody can occupy them, they need to be inspected.
The CO needs to be obtained by the new owner, or needs to be provided by the
The current owner needs to apply for it. Because if it's not up to code and there was work, if it's not up to code and it needs work, the current owner needs to perform whatever work needs to be done in order to pass the inspection. Same thing with the fire inspection. These could be two separate, or it could be all built into one, and there's one inspector that does both things.
So basically, before property is sold, the current owner has to do these two inspections, I guess, unless stated in the contract that they're not responsible for it.
Correct.
And what was it? Supposed to be what?
Right? Now, New Jersey does recognize the need to balance the legitimate commercial use of land with the need to preserve its vital resources and protect the quality of the state's air, water, and soil. New Jersey is the most densely populated state in the nation. You guys know that? We're the most densely populated state in the United States.
I heard that from Phil Murphy yesterday on a Instagram story.
Yeah. Yet the majority of our land is undeveloped. How does that work?
I guess we live on top of each other.
Yeah, we live in, yeah, pretty much. We live in densely populated areas, yet the majority of our land is undeveloped. Pretty interesting there. Here, I got a bunch of other New Jersey factoids I put together for you. Okay. For the curious minds that want to know. New Jersey first declared itself an independent state in 1776, and it was the third state admitted to the Union on December 18th, 1787. One of the 13 original colonies. We're actually the third state. New Jersey is 170 miles long and 70 miles wide. We have approximately 130 miles of coastline. The state has 21 counties and 564 municipalities with only 5 types: boroughs, townships, cities, towns, and villages. Those are the types of municipalities that we have here in New Jersey. Let me add to our notes here. In the densely populated state, yet the southern part has very large rural areas. Despite the fact that New Jersey is one of the smallest states in the Union, we have 5 distinct climate regions: northern, central, pine barrens, southwest, and the coastal regions. We're the 11th highest population of all states. The tiny little state of New Jersey has the 11th highest population. We're the 3rd highest income averages. New Jersey is located halfway between the equator and the North Pole on the eastern coast of the United States. And here's some information about our state: vegetable, birds, and mammals, and all that other stuff. The butterfly is the black swallowtail. Our state bug is the honeybee. Our state flower is the violet. Our state tree is the red oak. We're the only state to have a state cryptid. That's a state demon, the Jersey Devil. And our state dinosaur is the Hadrosaurus. And that's probably because New Jersey is the first state to actually have discovered a full skeleton of a dinosaur, which was the Hadrosaurus. This is interesting. We have more horses per capita than Kentucky. With all them racetracks and everything, you figure Kentucky? We got more horses than New Jersey. Well, we are the Garden State. We got a lot of farmland. We got a lot of horses. We also have several racetracks here too, even though they shut one down recently after more than 100 years of being in business. Our mascot is the demon, the Jersey Devil. Anybody ever hear about the Jersey Devil? It surprises me how many people never heard of the Jersey Devil. It's our state mascot, pretty much. We even have a hockey team named after it, the Jersey Devil. It was actually the Colorado Rockies that moved to New Jersey, and then we gave them the name, the Jersey Devil. We actually originated standardized time zones here in New Jersey. This is where they started. We're number 1 in inventing flavors and fragrances. The first telegraph message was ever sent from here. We had the first electric light bulb here with Thomas Edison and all of his laboratories. We had the world's first boardwalk. Cape May is the nation's first seaside resort. We are home to 26 known nesting pairs of peregrine falcons, which are the fastest animals on Earth. We're the diner capital of the world. We have more diners than any place else in the world. We're the nation's top 10 producer of items such as squash, bell peppers, tomatoes, blueberries, peaches, and cranberries. Hell, even Ocean Spray was headquartered here until recently. I think they moved out of state because of all the taxing and other governmental regulations. So they're no longer headquartered here, but they still have a lot of farmland here. Italian Americans are the state's largest ethnic group in New Jersey. However, Paterson, New Jersey has the largest Muslim population in the United States, the second largest Muslim population in the United States, second to Dearborn, Michigan, I think. New Jersey is the home to the highest concentration of Asian Indians in the Western Hemisphere. And we have the first complete dinosaur skeleton ever found here, that Hatterosaurus. And the first submarine was invented here in New Jersey. Grover Cleveland was our first president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. They were the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. He was here from New Jersey. Well, at least until Donald Trump was reelected in 2024, and now he's the second president to ever serve 2 non-consecutive terms. We have at least 100 battles that were fought here in New Jersey during the Revolutionary War. New Jersey was a centerpiece, very pivotal to us becoming a sovereign nation. So we fought. Does anybody know who we are fighting against to gain our independence? This is like those man on the street questions where we ask college kids questions and they never know the answers. We fought against the British. They're not allies today, but we fought against Britain to break away from them. We didn't want to be ruled by any kings or queens. Yet we got idiots today saying, well, we don't want kings here, no king's strategy, like they're trying to claim that Trump is a king or some kind of nonsense like that. They have no idea. In 1776, George Washington crossed the Delaware River in that famous portrait to ultimately fight and defeat British forces. This was one of the first major victories in the Revolutionary War. American abolitionists, I already told you some little stories about this, the Underground Railroad and things of that nature, but American abolitionists aided roughly 100,000 Americans in attaining their freedom. But even before that, New Jersey made its mark in 1804, where New Jersey passed an abolition law helping to free more than 12,000 slaves. Wow. When we talk about slavery today, it sounds like there was a lot more slaves back in the day, doesn't it? In the United States, the way they talk about slavery. Look, in New Jersey, it was what? Abolitionists aided 100,000 Americans in the entire United States that were slaves. Over here, we're talking about 12,000 in New Jersey, that we helped free more than 12,000 slaves here in New Jersey. After that, the state formally outlawed slavery in 1846, which was prior to the Civil War and the national abolition of slavery. So New Jersey became a prime stop on the Underground Railroad routes where people who were former slaves can escape to be free. And where was one of those stops? Where was one of those stopping points? Where the Underground Railroad ended up?
No, they know.
Mount Laurel.
Mount Laurel, yeah.
Remember I told you a story about Mount Laurel, about how those homes were close to each other? Okay. So New Jersey has one of the busiest and most extensive transportation systems in the world. More than 2/5 of our land is forested. And we have 28 state parks and 11 state forests. Lakes and ponds cover about 300 square miles of the state's area. And here's some resources of where I got this information. And I got a couple of videos here. You guys can maybe watch some of these on your own time, but I will play one of them. Is anybody familiar with the Pinelands, the Pine Barrens in New Jersey? Anybody know what that is?
Is
I've
going to the Atlantic City area? Going to the Atlantic City.
Yeah,
I've
you cross a lot of farmland, but we also do have the Pinelands, the Pine Barrens down there in the southern part of the state, the southeastern part of the state.
Hmm.
A lot of
I've
it's, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I've heard about the Pine Barrens. Isn't it like south of like where the army base is, McGuire Air Base, Fort Army Base, Fort Dix?
Yeah,
Like south of it are all of the Pine Barrens.
it covers actually from the center of the state down. It covers a huge area, about 300 miles. They were saying of 300 square miles of the area of the state it covers. You know, New Jersey's 170 miles long, 70 miles wide. This covers about 300 square miles of space. So it is a vast area of forest land. Now, why? Well, here, I'm going to play a little video for you so that you guys can see this and learn a little bit about it and the nature.
This forested reserve covers nearly.
I highly recommend you guys learn a little bit about New Jersey. Maybe even you could post some of these stories or make your own spin on the stories here about New Jersey and put them on your blogs, put them on your New Jersey real estate websites. Look at this picture. Look at this picture in front of you. Can you guys see this? The forest here with the street down the center, the road down the center?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is part of the Pinelands. Do you guys see any homes for miles? Throughout the horizon, even?
No.
I see nothing.
It is just open space. So here, let me crank up the volume on this a little bit. Let you guys listen about these stories about the. This is going to take 2 minutes of time.
This forested reserve covers nearly a quarter of New Jersey with otherworldly beauty and history, including a hidden tropical oasis. Spanning 7 counties in South Jersey, you'll find a wooded wilderness filled with outdoor adventures, spooky ghost towns, and natural beauty that never seems to end. Welcome to the Pine Barrens. Visitors can start by canoeing or kayaking down many of the rivers that run through the region, including the 50-mile-long Mullica River, and get up close to the native plants and animals. Then you can take to the trails for some hiking, biking, or horseback riding, but not without checking out the Batona Trail, which provides comprehensive views of the Pine Barrens wetlands and uplands across 3 state forests.
Early English settlers couldn't grow vegetables here, so they called it the Barrens and pretty much didn't live here for a good 100 years because it wasn't what they were interested in as far as trying to make a living. It's largely been preserved because of the water. Underneath our feet, 17 trillion gallons of pure water. And that's the big reason why the Pinelands exist. It's so large that you can really be in places that you feel like you're the only person there.
Get a glimpse of history as you stroll through Batstow Village, a former industrial center that's home to 33 historic buildings and one of the oldest operating post offices in the country. Trek deeper into the Pinelands and you'll discover mysterious ghost towns like Harrisville and its great paper mill ruins. Just keep an eye out for the Pine Barrens' most infamous resident, the Jersey Devil, who's rumored to rampage these areas from time to time. If you venture off the beaten path, you might stumble on one of these crystal clear bodies of water hidden within the massive coastal plain, and it's pure tropical bliss. While these blue holes might look like paradise, don't bother trying to take a dip. It's not allowed, and you could end up paying a hefty fine. No matter where you go in the Pine Barrens, one thing's for sure, you'll only find this just in Jersey. Stay tuned next month as I explore an amusement park that's home to the tallest roller coaster in the world.
So New Jersey actually has the Pine Barrens here. This is the largest undeveloped, untouched region of forestry in the United States. The only place that has more untouched land, I think, is the Amazon. That's incredible. And parts of Florida. I'm sorry, the Everglades, in the Everglades as well.
So is that considered like protected Greenland then?
Oh, yeah, it's definitely protected area, highly regulated areas. Like he was saying, you can't even swim in the waters there. Otherwise, you could face hefty fines for swimming in the water there, you know. But you could go there and enjoy the new creatures. We're always finding new animals, new species of animals and bugs and the little animals and such like frogs and all kinds of stuff. You know, you could find bobcats and bears and stuff there. You don't want to run into them, but you know, you are in the wilderness. You know, it's like going in the Amazon. You know, so be careful when you go in these areas, but do enjoy them. They do have biking trails and you know all kinds of stuff like this where you could go through there and just enjoy Mother Nature. It is a beautiful area, and there's a lot to see throughout the Pine Barrens. If you go to nj.gov, you could find links there that show you a lot of resources to explore our state. There's a lot to be learned about, and a lot of sights to see in New Jersey in nature, you know, and for a lot of other reasons as well. There's a lot to see here in New Jersey. Now, some of you before were shaking your heads that you never heard of the Jersey Devil before. What is the Jersey Devil? Well, let's see. Here's a lesson taught at Rutgers over it. Here, this is the shorter one I'll show you, 3 minutes long.
I know like a glimpse of it.
What's that? You caught a glimpse of the Jersey Devil?
The Jersey Devil story, I only know like a few details of it, but not all of it, because I only hear different stories from different people. But
yeah, I mean, look, here's one professor is telling the story. I got one that's a little bit better. It explains that there was even a presidential expeditions. I mean, this is an old folklore tale. It's been around since the late early 1800s. We had one of the early presidents that even set up an expedition to try to hunt them down. And they said that they found shot, and killed a female Jersey Devil, and they even took a sample of a hoof and a tongue or whatever. But none of that can be verified, and nobody knows what happened to it. So, of course.
Places in the forest are scorched. Strange tracks are found round about.
It's a story Angus Kress Gillespie, a professor in Rutgers American Studies Department, has told hundreds of times. The legend of Mrs. Leeds, her family in the Pine Barrens, and the Jersey Devil. It's said that in 1735, Mother Leeds was pregnant with her 13th child. Her husband Daniel, though a good provider, was an uninvolved father.
So the entire burden of taking care of the kids fell on Jane Leeds. The cooking, the cleaning, chopping wood.
She couldn't handle another addition.
In a moment of perhaps understandable weakness, she said, I hope this one's not a child. Let this one be a devil.
When the baby arrived, everything seemed normal. At first.
But then something went terribly wrong. In the space of less than 20 minutes, the baby grew to the size of 2 full-grown men.
He developed coal-red eyes and a horse's head, bat wings, goat feet, and serpentine tail.
And then unexpectedly, with one swipe of his right arm, he slit the throat of the midwife and attendants.
Leaving carnage in his wake, the Jersey Devil flew up the chimney and escaped into the Pine Barrens, where he's said to have terrorized the people ever since.
Most states, there's a state horse, a state bird, a state flower. As far as I know, New Jersey is unique to have a state monster.
Gillespie is a folklorist, and he's quick to explain that the Jersey Devil isn't a once-upon-a-time kind of tale. It's a legend.
Folktale implies that it's fiction.
Do you think it's true?
I try to keep an open mind.
There was a rash of sightings in 1909. And in the oral tradition of folklore, Gillespie has been given first-hand accounts by people who say they've seen the monster or know someone who has. But he says, as a folklorist, it's his job to remain agnostic.
When I see reports of sightings, my initial gut reaction would be skeptical. I mean, Is this photoshopped? How reliable is the witness?
The latest sighting was just 2 weeks ago.
I mean, the legend is very much alive, and these sightings sort of prove that.
So as Gillespie tells it,
when you're walking through the Pine Barrens of South Jersey, listen carefully as the wind comes off the ocean through the pines. Old Mother Leeds.
and if you hear a twig crack behind you, beware. It could be you know who. For NJTV News, I'm Maddie Orton.
You know, the story I have here in this slideshow about this, which is 59 seconds long. It's 1 minute. You know what? Screw it. Oh wait, no, that's the Pine Barrens. Yeah, the other tale I got here is from the about the Jersey Devil. It's this is 5 minutes long. I'm not going to waste your time on it, but I'll share the link with you guys right now. They talk about presidential expeditions, and they go into more than just the professor explaining a scary story. You know, it actually gets into it a little bit more and talks about you know, documentaries and that have happened and presidential expeditions that were assembled to try to track down the Jersey Devil. Look, this was from the early 1700s. They said 1730s that this tale's been around since. There we go. That's the history of the Jersey Devil. I sent you guys the link to that. But there's even more history in New Jersey to be had. If we look to the next slide here, you guys ever hear about the tale of Mary Alice and the graveyard in a movie theater parking lot? The grave site in the Route 1 movie theater parking lot in, what is this, North Brunswick, I believe, or New Brunswick? North Brunswick. Anybody ever hear about that?
No.
No, I haven't.
Here's a website called Weird NJ. They also on Facebook, they have their page there as well. They have all kinds of bizarre, weird stories about New Jersey. Here's one about the final parking place of Mary Ellis. And it is a sad love story type of story. Here is the ground. Take a look at this picture. Can you guys see this? Am I sharing it with you? You see the
Yes.
picture of the gravestones here in the forest on top of a hill?
Yes.
All right. This is the grave site of Mary Ellis and I believe her sister. And it says for the past 186 years, Mary Ellis resided in what she probably thought would always be a stately piece of property overlooking the scenic Rowton River. In actuality, Mary had really just been monopolizing prime parking space for the better part of the 20th century. The legend of how poor Mary came to rest beneath the asphalt of the Lowe's Theater parking lot on Route 1 in New Brunswick is a romantic and untimely magic story. Has anybody ever been to that movie theater?
Yeah.
Do you know that
Yes.
you know there's a grave in the parking lot?
Yes, I did know that.
Okay.
Yeah, I did see it back there.
So this is the story of Mary Ellis. Now, that grave used to be right in the parking spots. Today, they kind of relocated it. They put it on the grass and curbs around it so that people can't get that close with their vehicles to it because somebody is actually buried there. So it's Mary Ellis. So back, let's see, it came to New Brunswick in the 1790s to stay with her younger sister, Margaret. It was around this time that she met and fell in love with a man who was a sea captain and a former Revolutionary War officer. The captain sailed down the Rowton River, and out to sea one day, vowing that when he returned, he and Mary would be married. They would wed. He even left his beloved horse to look after, for her to look after in his absence. Every day after the captain's departure, Mary would ride the horse to her sister's house and what's now Livingston Avenue, down the banks of the river to eagerly await the glimpse of her lover's returning ship. In 1813, she purchased a parcel of farmland overlooking the river from which she could maintain her daily vigil. Mary died there 14 years later in 1828, still faithfully anticipating her captain's return. She was buried on the property and was eventually joined with her sister and other family members, according to the local law, and the captain's horse. Why? Because, look, all the time people went out on ships and ships sunk from storms. There were pirates. There were other reasons, that he may not have been returned, and his ship may have sunk or was pirated. So the plot was originally surrounded by an ornate route of iron fence laid in a rural wooded setting in the mid-20th century. Over the years, ownership of the land changed several hands several times, and the neighboring area has given bloom to the blight of strip malls and discount outlets. Mary's farm was paved over, and for many years the site of the Route 1 flea market. If anybody was there long enough to remember, here's where her grave site used to be, right here next to parking spots. This was a picture taken in 1993 when they were going to demolish the Route 1 flea market. All right, and then you can see they started grading the ground. Therefore, so they were lowering the ground by flattening and grading the ground level, and thus elevating her grave site even more. And so, let me see, there's songs that were written about her. This is what they're talking about. So there were songs in the 70s written about this. And this is what it looked like when the Lowe's Theater was first constructed, and there's her grave. All right. But the J.E. Burke Company that first bought this property, they agreed to, and they added it to the deed, that they were going to honor her gravesite and they weren't going to disturb it or move it. So that passes on from one owner to the next. Whoever buys this property has to maintain her gravesite and keep it there. Yeah, so as you came down the river from New Brunswick through the old growth of trees, you entered a clearing that was down a slope from a highway. You sheltered it from the highway and the factory noise. On three sides were the woods. The grave itself was mounted on about 10 feet up from the clearing floor. Okay, well, they kept degrading the ground, and it kept getting higher and higher too. Back when it was the U.S. flea market, you guys can read these stories on your own. But let me see, continue reading. Do they have any of the modern pictures of this? Yeah, okay, so this is what it looks like today. Well, no, it doesn't. That's all green. When they started modernizing it, they put it on a grassy area with a curb in between, and they made it look nicer. But here, I guess it was allowed to get growth over it, and they didn't keep up with it. But here's where it is all trimmed up and nice looking. And that's probably how it looks like today. If you go to Google and you do a search for the grave site of Mary Ellis, you can see many different photos of that. I have them here in our class content to add to, miscellaneous class content. Grave site of Mary Ellis, where is it? I got it somewhere here. How is it? Got too many links here. Here we go. Final parking place of Mary Ellis. Oh no, this just takes you here. But if you go to Google and you do a search for that, it's interesting. Grave of Mary Ellis. There you go. Oh, I spelled it wrong. M-A-R-Y, one R. So you can see some more modern pictures of it. People got to somebody even put some flowers over there. That was nice. Dude, that's when it was grown over a bit and not taken care of. But it looks nice today. But that's the gravesite of Mary Ellis. And that's the story about that. Anyway, you guys ever hear about the movie Jaws? Anybody ever hear of the movie Jaws?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I've heard of it.
The killer shark. Do you know that's based on a true story that happened here in New Jersey?
Oh.
I did not know that.
New Jersey's got a lot of history here. We, New Jersey, we got a lot of history here. So here's the real story of Jaws. I've got a bunch of links here of videos. I'm not going to be showing you. Some of these are 45 minutes long. Some of them are shorter. I'm not going to waste your time on this, but you guys can watch this. It's based on the Matawan Maneater. This I could just show you Weird NJ's website link for it instead of showing you the videos. I'll share these links with you. They're in the class. They're in the slideshow anyway. But take a look here. This is the Matawan Maneater, the real life Jersey Jaws. All right. In the past, people never thought that sharks would harm humans. They weren't dangerous. They were more scared of us. So they would ignore them pretty much when they went in the water. Until July 1st, 1916 in Beach Haven, the tourist season was in full swing, and this enchanting young doctor, eligible bachelor, was swimming and had his torso bitten off, and he managed to work his way back to shore. They carried him to the seaside resort, put him on the desk there, the front desk in that hotel, and that is where he died. And then further in New Jersey, in Matawan, which is actually 2 miles in from the shoreline, a shark actually swam through the waterways into the area where there was brackish water. Brackish waters were freshwater and saltwater meet, and the shark was still able to live and swim and breathe in those waters. There was a bunch of kids swimming in a hole there. They were swinging off of a rope and jumping in the water, having a good time swimming. This is still about the story about this other guy getting killed. Had both of his legs taken off by the Matawan Maneater in Spring Lake. And then there was another instance where this guy that got bitten and his torso, the doctor, he got put on this hotel here in Spring Lake. Oh, that's the same one. And then we had this other one, 11 miles inland, small town, 11 miles inland in Matawan Creek, where the shark made its way into there, and the kids were swimming. One kid jumped into the water, yelped, and went under. An adult was there that witnessed this, and he jumped in the water to try to help save the kid that he thought was drowning, and he never surfaced either. They were both killed by this same shark. These are the stories that Jaws was built on. So there were multiple attacks by this killer shark within a small period of time. So you had people that were going out trying to hunt this shark and kill him. After he killed the guy at the beach, and then he killed this child, and then an adult who tried saving him. So people were out there with their rifles and shotguns and even dynamite, trying to blow up what they think were shark sightings in the water. Look at this. Look at these ladies. Look at these mothers over there with the shotgun trying to hunt the shark back in 1916. And there they caught him. But I don't know if this was that same shark, but man-eating species caught in Belfort, New Jersey. Yeah, look at that shark. That shark looks like a human. So anyway, that little boy that jumped in was Lester Stillwell. And let me see. You could see this is where the shark swam in through these tunnels underneath the train tracks. And then a plaque was placed there for the boy Lester Stillwell and the Stanley Fisher that jumped in to save him that was killed. This guy, you could watch him on his canoe or kayak go through the route. Anyway, there's a lot of weird and strange stories on weirdnj.com. You guys may find interesting and want to see. So anyway, here, let me get you these links and I'll share them with you. They're pretty interesting stuff, right?
Yes.
I mean, who ever heard of any of this crap before? So here, I'll share all these links with you in the chat window there. Here's the ones from the Pine Barrens and the Jersey Devil as well. I'll share all those links. So you guys can maybe check them out. You could copy them now and then check them out later. All right. Now, the rest of this chapter, we're going to be talking about hazardous substances that can be found in construction or in the earth, but we find them when dealing in real estate. We do come across hazardous substances, so we need to learn about them. We're going to learn about asbestos, lead, and lead-based paint and other lead hazards, radon, urea formaldehyde, which is in some types of spray foam insulation that is used to insulate houses, in those expanding foams, mold, carbon monoxide, electromagnetic fields, the EMFs, groundwater contamination, and underground storage tanks. So this is what's coming up, what we're going to learn about in the rest of this chapter. And I think we've reached the end of class already. Crap. So we'll continue this tomorrow.